Well, I think the first piece of advice is just that the science suggests you can intervene, right? I mean, I think a lot of people who are not happy at a given time think that there's something about them that's messed up, right? Genetically, they're just predispositioned to be unhappy, or they're kind of built to be that way. And I think, the first thing to tell people is just that, that might be the case to a certain extent. There's some heritability to most well-being measures, but there's a lot you can do to intervene on them. And so I think that's kind of message number one is, look, you can take some action and fix this. In terms of the specific actions I would suggest, if you look at the positive psychology literature, one of the hugest effects on our own happiness is our social connection. There's a famous paper by Marty Seligman and Ed Diener that suggests that social relationships and strong social relationships are necessary for happiness. They're not sufficient for happiness, but you can't find happy people that don't have them. And so that really suggests that if you want to be like happy people, you should focus on your social relationships. And that means, taking a hard look at your priorities to figure out if those social relationships are falling by the wayside. And I think in the modern day where we prioritize work and the things that go with work, and for my students, their academic performance, often that's coming at the opportunity cost of the time you'd spend on your social relationships. And so that's kind of hit number one is, are you making time for the people that you really care about in life? And a lot of that work also comes from some lovely studies by Robert Waldinger and his colleagues. He's part of this long-running Harvard happiness study that it's super cool. It's been studying men from Harvard, and they were men because the study started back in the 1930s. So men from Harvard, and also men from lower income Boston neighborhoods. And they've been tracking them over time. And so now their original cohort is in their 90s.
Wow.
And they've been able to look at all kinds of features about their health, their immune function and whether they get heart disease and diabetes and so on. And what's remarkable is that a major predictor, not just of mental health like happiness, but also physical health, is the nature of these men's social relationships. They're actually predicting longevity now, so that the men who are still alive in this cohort study are the ones that seem to have tended to have the best social relationships. And so, again, kind of doubling down on social relationships is great because it's like doing double duty. It's not just good for your mental health, it's great for your physical health too. Being other-oriented generally, and what I mean by this is the act of paying attention to other people over yourself. So being the kind of person that gives to charity, that volunteers your time, that is focused on other people generally, seems to be a big one for your happiness and your health. One that sounds silly is what I tell my students are just healthy habits. And by that, I mean, the stuff that we know is good for physical health, like making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure you're getting enough exercise, making sure you're eating right. Those physical things seem to have a huge impact on people's mental health, much more than we think. The act of being a little bit more present, being mindful, and then changing your mindset towards things, like having a mindset that's a little bit more grateful and a little bit more compassionate generally. And these are mindsets that often come from ancient practices like different forms of meditation and so on. So there's so much work by folks like Nick Epley and Liz Dunn and others that show that the simple, fleeting connections that we have with strangers can be really powerful for our well-being. And in this sense, I really mean the sort of happy in your life kind of well-being. It really seems to bump up our positive emotions. And so these are things like, the simple conversation you have with the barista at the coffee shop, or, chatting up your Uber driver while you're on your ride. These kinds of simple social connections seem to bump up our mood. And the absence of them can seem to kind of decrease our mood in some interesting ways. And so what's striking about that intervention, though, is that people really don't think that's the case. This is work by Nick Epley. He finds that people make incredibly strong predictions that talking to strangers is going to be weird or awkward or just not very fun. And what he finds is that because of that misprediction, people tend not to talk to strangers when they have the opportunity to do so. And that's true of introverts and extroverts. I think the bigger issue for introverts is that prediction in introverts is even stronger. But both extroverts and introverts, Nick finds, actually get a big bump in well-being from having that conversation with the stranger.